Welcome to MMA Fancast. My name's Luke, and give a big warm welcome to world traveling three-time amateur MMA champion and fresh back from his 2 months in Thailand, Hunter Starner. Hunter, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Luke. It's good to be back and good to be back on the show as always.
Well, I really appreciate your willingness to come on the show. You've been coming on the show now for a while. I greatly appreciate it. I'm sure people watching it appreciate it. You were so kind to come on the show June 7th, just about a day before you flew to Thailand to do some Muay Thai training over there. So, I really appreciate it. I think people liked watching the video about what you were going to be doing because it's a little bit of a break from MMA. You're undefeated in amateur MMA, kind of on the cusp of going pro several different times. I've watched you win one of your 3 amateur titles, MMA titles. That was for 247 Fighting Championship, which you defeated a previously undefeated, very high-ranked fighter, and I know you've been doing that your whole career. But let's jump in and just talk about the trip. It was super cool to hear about what your plans were. I know sometimes international travel changes those plans. So let's talk about what actually ended up happening while you were over in Thailand.
Yeah, like I mentioned, my last time I was on, the plan was to train at Tiger.
Mm-hmm.
End up doing that. I think I told you I was going to train somewhere else. Well, I ended up training at Tiger both months. Reason being was because so I got literally my second week I was there. I was able to pick up a Muay Thai fight, first ever all stand-up fight where I couldn't rely on the ground. Great experience. Ended up winning that. And then literally like the last month was up. I was booked for another Muay Thai fight. So I was like, you know what? I might as well just book another month at Tiger. And plus I was starting to get to know the coach as well and starting to make some friends. And so I was like, you know, I'm just gonna stay at Tiger again. I think it's gonna be worth it, which it was. And so I did my other second Muay Thai fight. Ended up losing that decision, but you know, it was an awesome experience. I did mainly the Muay Thai classes. I mean, they offer all kinds of classes. They have obviously the MMA classes, kickboxing, Western boxing. But I just stuck mainly with I did some wrestling classes here and there, and I would do the MMA sparring every like Monday and Friday. But for me, the Muay Thai, that was my most consistent thing I did. I did that in the mornings, and then I did the second Muay Thai class in the afternoons. It was like 9 a.m. and then the second class was like 3 p.m. And then sometimes I would do 3 days. If we did the Monday MMA sparring or Friday MMA sparring, that was later in the evening at like 6. And so my main thing was just to get as much sparring time as possible. Great thing about Tiger is they got so many people coming at gym, and it's huge. You're never really going to be sparring with the same person consistently. You're always going to be rotating around. And, you know, the guys who go there are it ranges from pretty decent fighters to obviously like professional level, like UFC, Bellator. So like it ranges. There's all kinds of skill levels there, which is awesome. So it was really a good experience. And I mean, coming back home and I can definitely tell my skills have gone up just from those 2 months, and it was awesome.
Well, I appreciate you giving us a great little roundup. I'm sure we could be here for several days. You telling us all about the various things. You were in a different culture with a different language a lot of the time. Before we talk about kind of some of the fun parts about Thailand, I'm assuming that the 2 Muay Thai fights you took were full rules, meaning all knees allowed, elbows allowed, head kicks allowed. What was it like? I mean, in our world, that's a full pro set. So what was it like being in 2 fights that were pro Muay Thai fights in the sense of what the rules allowed them to be?
Yeah, like you said, they were full rule fights. Like you said, meaning there was no shin pads, it was elbows, it was everything you see in like a professional fight, except it was Muay Thai. Really, it's a pretty simple process in Thailand. It's kind of like, if you want to fight, they'll find you a fight, and you don't really have to go through a process. They just book you on whatever card. There's like 3 stadiums in Phuket they can fight at. And then there's obviously a lot more in like Bangkok, rest of Thailand. But in Phuket specifically, there's 3 stadiums and literally fight every single night between stadiums. So at Tiger Muay Thai, they have like beginner, intermediate, and advanced Muay Thai. So I did like the advanced Muay Thai classes, and a lot of those guys who go to that class fight out of that class. And the coaches are the ones that come up to you and like, hey, do you want to fight if they see you're experienced enough? And so this second week I was there, the coach was like, hey, you want to fight? The fight was on Friday. I think he asked Monday, and I was like, sure. And I'd gone. There was no process I had to go through. I didn't have to get a physical or anything like that. It's just like you're gonna fight it. It's gonna be full rules, and that's exactly what it was. It was crazy. So like, and the coaches are Thai, so I mean, I don't really understand what they were saying half the time. It was very broken English, and so it was a crazy experience. And the first fight, kind of going through it, I fought some dude from like England, and also there's no weighing in. You kind of just tell them what you're walking around at. At the time, I thought there was no scale either around there. So at the time I was like, I'm probably walking around at like 66, 67 kilos, which in pounds, that's like 145, 146, 147, something like that. And so they were like, okay, we got you an opponent. And then when I looked at the guy, I was like, God damn, he is at least 20 pounds heavier. But I was like, man, as soon as I saw him, I was like, I know this is gonna be a fight. But like I said, no weigh-ins. They kind of just match you up with someone around your size. But he was a big dude. But man, it was a great experience. Ended up winning by decision. Knocked him down, I think twice. Tripped him a bunch, but knocked him down with punches twice. And I think that's what won me the fight. Those were automatic 10-8 rounds. But it was a war, and man, it was great. But yeah, like it's not like in America where you have to go through physicals, you have to get a license. No, they're like, you want to fight, you fight, or you don't have to go through any process. If you want to fight, and you want to fight bad, you got to fight. You don't have to go through any of that. So it was awesome.
Yeah, that is what Thailand's known for. You said it real quickly in passing, but for people who don't understand, we're talking huge stadiums like soccer stadiums with people at them every night, and it's every day of the week. There's fights. Now, obviously, some fights are bigger and more publicized than others, but the reality is that's their culture. Just like maybe Brazil culture would be soccer or some national sport like that. That is their entire sport. And it's really, from everybody that's been over there, that's their experience. Now, just real quick, you're a skilled, high-level, collegiate and above wrestler. We've seen it. Your striking's incredible. What was it like working Muay Thai trips? You mentioned them. They are, of course, legal in MMA. Some people, we saw Kat Singana, who had fought quite a bit Muay Thai over in Thailand. She would sometimes throw like an actual Muay Thai trip. What do you think about where that gives you a dynamic skill set? Because people know you're like an American style wrestler. What do you think about kind of the flow that gives you, like a new wrinkle to your stand up, but that also is a takedown?
Yeah, Muay Thai style like trips. You really, how I look at it is like, now that I've gone through learning some of that, like I don't really have to rely on so much as lowering my level and taking a shot. Now I've gotten a lot better at, just from those 2 months there, because we did clinching like 3 days out of the week, and that's where you learn all those trips and stuff. And yeah, you can stay upper body once you clinch up. It really, just like in wrestling, like pushing, pulling motions, baiting him into where he steps. I mean, it's the exact same thing as wrestling, but instead of like maybe reaping a leg, you just kind of kick it from out underneath him. And so with me, I think it's definitely helped because I don't really have to rely on taking shots. I could really rely on that. And, when wrestling, I was a skilled Greco wrestler, but, there's no really a lot of trips. It's all, obviously upper body. You can't use the legs. With this, it's upper body, but, you can rely on trips, and you can manipulate other people's movements. And so it helps because I don't have to rely on a shot. If I want to unclinch out of that situation, go to an elbow knee, that's what helps too, because then people are looking for a trip, so it was good. It was fun learning that, a new aspect of something I haven't seen before.
Certainly. And for people that may not fully appreciate this, the posture is very different. In striking, the posture is vertical. So in Muay Thai, the posture a lot of times is vertical, unless, of course, you put your opponent in a double plumb Muay Thai clinch, and then you got to obviously be pulling down. But I think that does give more freedom to your striking, because really, really good grappling, really, really good wrestling will always be important. There's places your head ends up being in wrestling on a shot that doesn't happen when you're using Muay Thai, and vice versa. There's pros and cons to everything. I think the clinch work is why, and this is sort of into bare knuckle boxing here for a second, but I think one of the reasons why, and I'm not saying this to insult anybody like Artem Lobov and others, but below average MMA fighters, pro fighters who made it to the UFC but were not great in the UFC, maybe 500 or below in the UFC. This is not an insult to them. What we saw is they went to bare knuckle boxing, which, because of the word boxing, people think, well, what is an MMA fighter going to have an advantage? Well, it's because it's unlimited one arm clinch. They don't allow the 2-arm clinching like in Muay Thai, because of course Muay Thai allows knees and elbows and other things. But I think that's what you've seen. For anybody that's wondering why these sort of below average MMA fighters go into, Chris Lieben and others go into, and he was a great fighter, but had kind of finished in MMA and wasn't on a good win streak. They go into bare knuckle, but that unlimited Muay Thai, which exists in Muay Thai, which exists in MMA, those are probably the two places that the unlimited double plumb exists. And K1 made it down to 1, I think, Glory rules. There's some kickboxing, but they've eliminated it because of Overeem years ago. But anyhow, I think it's impressive that Muay Thai fighters, MMA fighters have to deal with something that most fans look at and don't even realize how devastating it can be to be caught in a double plumb Muay Thai. We've seen that in amateur. I'm sure you've experienced that in amateur MMA without knees even being legal. Like, what was your first experience of some of the differences in MMA? That, of course, you've been dominant, you're undefeated. What were some of the differences going back in your first 3 fights? What was it like getting into situations that just don't exist in wrestling?
And I'm taking away from like the Muay Thai fights I did. A fight like that, there's just a shit ton of kicking. And plus that scores a lot. In my past fights and amateur fights, I probably kicked people a handful of times.
Yeah.
And I was able to walk pretty well afterwards. In my first Muay Thai fight ever, I threw the most kicks I've ever thrown in the 7 fights I had, and I could barely walk the next week. So, between my kicks getting checked, and not just my kicks getting checked, but checking the other guy's kicks, that people see that and they don't realize like that. Yeah, that hurts. Like that's more devastating than punches or, some strikes people absorb. Like getting your kicks checked and checking other people's kicks, like that. People see like Leon Edwards. You saw him limping out of the cage after knocking out Usman. Well, yeah, he's kicking people. I mean, that doesn't feel good. Kicking people's bones. That's why you see people limping out of a cage, especially in kickboxing, Muay Thai, because it takes a toll. So yeah, like for me, the most eye-opening thing was there's a lot of freaking kicks, and I'm glad I was able to experience that, because my hips, just from doing all those kicks, like in obviously practicing those fights, my hips feel better. I'm more confident with my hands now, because then I can rely on my kicks more. But that's probably the most important thing that I realize is just the kicking. There's so much kicking in Muay Thai, and I've only seen a handful of K1 kickboxing fights, and obviously there's a lot of kicking in there too. But Muay Thai, like the kicking aspect of Muay Thai, that scores higher
Yep.
than the actual boxing aspect. It doesn't matter like how clean a shot you're getting
Yep.
with your hands. If you can get clean shots with your legs, you're going to score way higher than any boxing.
And being around, this is going back a couple years ago, but hats off to Gary Grant. He runs USKA, which is a kickboxing Muay Thai promotion out in Allentown, Pennsylvania, closer to New Jersey, where you're from. Wait, Virginia. I get that wrong every time. You're not from New Jersey. You're from Virginia. I apologize. But Eastern Pennsylvania, Gary Grant, great guy, runs USKA. There have been a lot of disagreements over the different scoring, and this gets into the weed, different scoring between kickboxing and Muay Thai. And one of the biggest differences between a Muay Thai judge and a kickboxing judge, and sometimes they're the same judge, but they score differently depending on what fight, what discipline is having, it was a big thing for me to learn too as a coach, is that in kickboxing, boxing is obviously a big deal. Kicking is too, but somebody could basically outbox the opponent, barely kick, and win because they won the fight. In Muay Thai, that's not going to happen unless, of course, your boxing knocks the opponent out. Then obviously that would make a difference. But aside from that, like you're saying, things that are specific to Muay Thai, knees, elbows, and kicks, are scored much higher. So are trips, like you said. So it is interesting how that trained your mind and your body. I don't know if you ever grew up and watched the Muay Thai leg deadening drills. And there's about 10 different ways, maybe more, people deaden their shins. Have you ever done that before? And now are you more willing to be like, hey, I better do some shin conditioning because, as you said, there's a real advantage if your shin bones are deadened. There's actually two things: you can deaden the nerve, and you can also strengthen the calcium deposits on the front of your shin. So how much had you done in shin bone? I do know that you train out of Muay Thai gym in the United States, so clearly you're very familiar with it. But what have you thought now of your shin bones, and how much are you going to give them attention going forward?
Yeah, going forward. I mean, even from those 2 months, I feel like my shins have developed just from those 2 months. But like going forward, like yes, I've seen those drills, and and even in when I was there at Tiger, they said the best thing to do is just do a lot of kicks on a really heavy bag, like the bottom of the bag where all that stuff is packed in. Just do a lot of kicks on there. It's not gonna feel good, especially if you're new, but do 100 each leg, twice a day. And yeah, I'm definitely gonna be paying a lot more attention to that, because like that is an advantage. Like I was watching the one event just last weekend or last Friday, and I don't know if you know his name, Nongo. He's a bantamweight, for one, the bantamweight champion. He was fighting Liam Harrison, and he got a leg kick KO he only kicked the leg twice, Liam Harrison's leg twice, but the second kick, just because their shins are so conditioned and his kicks is already so powerful, he kicked Liam Harrison's leg. He couldn't get back up because his knee went out. Wow. And so, yeah, the shin condition is huge over there. And like I had said, my first Muay Thai fight, I mean, it was literally, it took me about 5 days just to recover, because I didn't really kick with my right because I'm a southpaw.
Right.
My left shin, from kicking the guy's elbow 5 times flush, you don't feel it when you're in there, but when you get out, when all that adrenaline finally wears off, you're like, shit, it was awful. So yeah, I'm definitely gonna be paying more attention to it for sure.
Well, that's also, you mentioned elbows, kicking elbows. That's also what I think can really help Muay Thai transitioning to MMA, because you're obviously really focusing on your MMA career. Is sometimes in pure sort of MMA, people forget, they start flaring their elbows out this way. Where in Muay Thai, you better keep your elbow up and down to protect, because you can take a kick vertically, but a kick can sneak under if it's out, and you'll see skill. So the fact that your opponent from England had his elbow straight up and down meant you were kicking it. Had he not had that defense, you'd have been breaking ribs, or at least impacting ribs. And you mentioned Rocky Edwards. What an incredible come from behind fight. I mean, just incredible. But he was probably limping from the knockout kick. I know the knockout kick is going to be his highlight forever. It's the greatest, most important kick that late in a championship fight. The previous head kick knockout in a championship fight was probably Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey because of how big, but that was 2 rounds in. It wasn't 1 minute to go in the 5th round. But
Yeah.
when you kick somebody's skull, that is a firm bone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's impressive. We all can visualize Usman's blank stare because he was out, but your foot bones don't want to do that. So it is interesting sometimes how you can win by the knockout, but you're still going to feel that. So
Oh yeah.
hats off, obviously, to Rocky Edwards. What an incredible fight, but nothing sort of painless in MMA, even when it's a spectacular win. Now that we've brought up MMA, seamless transition. You have said it. You're obviously incredibly talented. You've been focused on MMA now for several years. In previous interviews, you thanked your parents for supporting you and helping you in your career, obviously, and then all your training partners and all of that. At one point, when we first met and started talking, you were delaying your pro debut, which would have been January of this year ish, in order to fight Cam, the Mallrat Agar, who was undefeated. You guys were both 6-0. Turned out to be a great decision to get that experience against another stud undefeated guy because you came away with a really good win for 247. Now that you've had these 2 fights under pro rules, or at least pro style rules in Muay Thai, where are you? You've been back a couple weeks. Where are you with your mindset as far as your next MMA fight, pro, amateur? And do you have any announcements? And if not, that's no problem. We'll have you back on once it's officially announced. I'd love to interview about MMA, but I got to ask those MMA questions.
Yeah, as of right now, we're looking for a fight in October. I mean, I think October's basically confirmed, but I'm not totally sure, so I'm not gonna confirm anything on here. But we're looking definitely fight for October, maybe trying for sooner, and be nice to do like mid-September, maybe late September. But October, November, CFFC is having an event in Tampa.
Oh, wow.
So we're looking at that. And January, CFFC again, they're going to be in Jersey. So I think I had originally said that CFFC is going to be in Jersey, I think this October timeframe, but it turns out they're going to be in Tampa in November, and then they'll be in Jersey in January. And going back, I actually did have a confirmed fight for last weekend. It was like mid-July. We signed I was supposed to fight this Georgian guy, 3-0 as an amateur. He's like a black belt in judo, really good guy, trained at Ray Longo's gym. So he trains with freaking crazy, Sterling and Marab, freaking crazy good guys.
Right.
And so, but that fight was basically confirmed, or was confirmed. We signed the contracts, and I was already filling out the medicals for that fight. And then it was going to be in Philadelphia in August, and it was like maybe 3 weeks after the fight got confirmed. The Pennsylvania commissioner, he basically said no. he wouldn't allow us to go pro for some reason. I don't know why, but so that fight got scrapped, and we were trying to find a replacement or like another event, but nothing. So. But like I said, we're looking for to October, November, and January. So once I get that first fight, the ball is going to be rolling, and I'm excited.
Well, it's always disappointing. I don't want to become political here, but Commissioner Serb has done things that I'm sure in his mind are for the right purposes and right reasons. But there's a long history in Pennsylvania of things not really going well. Dana White, if anybody wants to look up, Dana White has said some things about Serb and this is something that people forget. Even the UFC, unless in the examples where the UFC is their own commissioner, and they've done that a few times in Abu Dhabi and other places where they commission themselves. But if the UFC comes into Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, they have to follow by Serb's rules, and there's all types of things that come out of that. What I love about interviewing you is to say you like to stay busy is an absolute understatement. You would have been about a week back from Thailand and you wanted to fight. I mean, it's just incredible. And to go pro, it's just incredible. The way you're thinking ahead. Obviously, I want to have you on the show before your pro debut and all the fights in between. You're a fantastic person to have on because you're both an incredible physical talent, but you also really break down the fights well. And you're a very mentally tough. I've said this to people. I think in the fight that you had for 247, I might have mentioned it. You had submission wins that would have been BJJ sort of inspired without any BJJ training. I mean, you were winning fights because you were like, well, I'm a wrestler. I train at a Muay Thai gym, which is a great gym for you. They really take care of you. You love them. They're in your corner. They're great coaches and all that. But you just kind of felt like, well, this is a body part that'll hurt if I do this. So let's see what happens. And I think that mindset, we saw that once with the Mr. Wonderful. Phil Davis invented his own submission. I think it's still the only time it's been used in the UFC, and it's called the Mr. Wonderful. So I think it's known, particularly wrestlers that understand bodies and understand manipulation of bodies can figure out ways to end fights, even if they're not like official or trained that way. So you're an impressive guy. I love having you on the show. Thanks for taking time out. Let's mentally schedule for whenever you can talk about your pro debut. We'll focus just on that when that time comes. This has been a wonderful wrap up of Thailand. Congratulations on both of your fights in Thailand, and not just your win in Thailand. That's obviously impressive, but even the loss, because to fight experienced fighters in Thailand, it's a different experience. The culture is different. Everything about it's different. And you got experience that's going to pay off in a pro MMA fight where all of those things are allowed. So it's just incredible to have you back on. Thanks for taking time before and after Thailand. And I appreciate you. The triple champ, amateur MMA, soon to be most likely a pro MMA fighter, fresh off his trip to Thailand. Thanks so much for taking time out, Hunter. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Luke. I appreciate it. As always, I'm looking forward to come back on the show. Thank you.
You got it. Thanks a bunch.